Hell to Raze is an action platformer made in Unreal Engine by a team of 14 students as part of the University of Utah Entertainment Arts and Engineering course. It recommends a controller before showing you the main menu. You can start, load, select levels from Limbo, Wrath, Greed, and with bosses for each level. There's an options menu for screen resolution and the credits in the bottom corner, attributing the game to Hellhound Studios. From the prompt, I then plugged in a controller, which was an instant switch. I'd last clicked the credits with my mouse, and that must have confused it for some reason, since when I tried to press Start Game or any other option on the main menu, it kept going back to playing the credits, and I ended up having to start the game with the mouse. Despite how much I don't want to do this, considering the amount of editing time it's going to add to this video, I think the best way to talk about this game is in categories rather than chronologically. It's the easiest way to organise it, considering I have a fair amount to talk about. My first and biggest point about this game is that a word that popped into my head to describe my experience was inconsistent. Janky would also apply, since there are a fair few glitches in this game, and in a fairly unique way in that the glitches weren't consistent throughout the game. Take for example my first load up. I had a play around to test the controls. It's left stick to move, A to jump, and A again to what seemed to be float but looked more like a mid-air seizure, B for a circular swing, Y for an upward swing and jump, and X for a basic swing. I then stepped slightly forward to talk to a blue goat demon looking thing called Felray. First it told me to get up despite the fact I'd already been up and jumped around, but somehow during the entire cutscene I was able to jump and attack. The text speed seemed to be weirdly slow, and it didn't look like it was skippable when I mashed buttons, until I pressed A again and it looked like it was kind of skipping. Unfortunately that meant to skip through the text at a relatively normal speed. I had to hop up and down like an impatient child, which was very distracting. I still wasn't convinced I was actually affecting the text, since sometimes it lingered for ages and sometimes it disappeared and appeared quite normally. Following this, I did a quick death test by seeing if I could jump over the tiny fence or if I would get invisible walled. The game let me kill myself, and then refused to respawn me or let me open the menu that I'd found to respawn myself or go back to the main menu. It just black screened me until I closed the game and reloaded. Guess what happened on the reload, though? My character was suddenly uninteractable during the cutscene, and I could skip text with A again. And no matter what happened for the entire rest of the game, I could no longer control a character in a cutscene. I also never got a perma black screen on death from falling off an edge either. I suspect the black screen may have been because there was no save point allocated for my character yet. There are stones that you can save at, and one was right in front, but because I ran backwards and hadn't activated it yet, it must have tried to find a respawn point and failed. As for the controllable character in a cutscene, I can't begin to tell you why it would have done that once and then never again. So that was glitch number 1. Glitch number 2, a big glitch actually, came from the first boss fight. Most of this game is going to end up being spoiled, by the way, so sorry about that one, but I have to talk about it. Saying the glitch came from the first boss fight is a little misleading. The first and second time I fought the boss, everything went perfectly fine. I got beaten to death because I didn't understand the mechanics in my very first interaction, but on round 2 of my first run, I beat the boss and exactly the right things happened. I got some XP, I got given 2 new special abilities, and the portal opened to the next level. The boss disintegrated, I ran inside, the new level loaded, all was well. I then took a break from the game, and when I reloaded I got trigger happy and pressed A to skip the please use controller prompt, but then when it didn't go away I got impatient and pressed A again. The game registered that as a double press, and so it considered the first A as getting rid of the message, and the second A as selecting a restart from the main menu, meaning I was back to square one. I played the level again, beat the boss, all was fine, and moved on to the next section and carried on playing. After a glitch happened to the second level boss, and I got annoyed and quit the game and reloaded it, I didn't learn my lesson from the first time and restarted my game by accident again. From that point onward, the first boss never functioned correctly again. I got to her this time, beat her pretty quickly now I knew her moves and her gimmick, and suddenly my XP bar poured full and maxed out, gave me all the abilities in the game, the boss didn't disintegrate, and the game never gave me back control of my character, meaning I couldn't progress to the next level. I could access the menu, so tried to reload from my last checkpoint, went to fight the boss again, and it happened again. Reloaded and started the entire game from scratch, and it happened again. I even went into the level select and loaded just the boss fight up, and it happened again there. I don't know what I did, but this game was no longer my friend. As you already heard, I got a glitch on the second boss too. Not just one, but two actually. The first one I didn't really recognise at first as a glitch. This boss is on an island in the middle and you have to grapple to him to be able to damage him. On the first run I actually managed this. I jumped to the middle, attacked him, did damage, got booted back, survived a bit and did it again. On my second round of attacking him, none of my hits did any damage. Not at all. I thought perhaps that this was my mistake or that I was doing something wrong, since on the first boss I was doing no damage to her on my first fight and thought that that was a glitch, but it turns out that I didn't spot the magic jar which when destroyed allows you to cause her damage. I thought there might be a magic jar to this one, but I couldn't find a thing. Turns out there is no magic jar, it was a glitch where the enemy just refused to take damage after the first round of you getting to him, making the boss unbeatable. I tried several reloads from checkpoint and from load game in the main menu, and eventually, for absolutely no reason, the game decided to let me play properly and do him damage, which allowed me to beat the level. Which is when glitch number 2 happened. The game cutscened me after giving me my text options to either kill or spare him, but I was still taking damage in the cutscene, so in panic at not wanting to be killed and do the boss again, I just picked an option. And guess what happened? It froze! I couldn't control my character, the game didn't despawn the enemy, and the portal was inaccessible to move to the next level. So I had to restart. After encountering the freeze glitch with the first boss following this event, I then reloaded the start of level 2 from the main menu and got back to the boss again, where I once again encountered the invincibility glitch after the first round of attacking and gave up trying to beat the boss entirely. I mean, I'd already beat him, but I couldn't get my kudos. To give some perspective, my playthrough overall went sort of like this. Level 1, level 1 boss. Break from the game and accidentally spam A, ending up starting from the beginning again. Level 1 boss. Level 2 boss. Glitch. Accidental restart. Level 1 boss. Glitch. Level 1 boss. Glitch again. Level 1 boss via the main menu. Glitch again. Level 2 from the main menu. Level 2 boss. Glitch again. Level 3 from the main menu. Level 3 boss. Why did I insist on this continuity when the game chops up levels for you, you may ask? Simple, the XP and rewards. The more enemies you kill, the more you get XP, which gives you better abilities, more health, etc. If you play the game through continuously, you get to move into the new level with all of the perks you've unlocked. This took a bit of experimenting, and I'm not sure how true it is, but it appears that if you load a level from the main menu, you go into it with whatever XP and abilities you just had in the level that you played before, but only if you don't close the game. For example, when I reloaded by accident and ended back in level 1, I did try to reload into level 2. But because the last level I had touched was level 1, I was back to base stats and abilities, meaning I loaded into the start of level 2 with base stats and abilities instead of what I would have had at the end of level 1 had I completed it and beaten the boss. When I did eventually do this and load into level 2 to carry on the playthrough, it was because I got stuck on the level 1 boss and didn't complete it. But since I had a latest save point in which I had extra perks and earned XP, I loaded into level 2 with those perks and XP. I was missing the bonus abilities that you earn from beating the level 1 boss, so it was harder, but I at least had more than the base stats. The final boss, also, I'm not sure if it was a glitch or if I'm just thick as mince, but I couldn't figure out at all how to beat it. There are 3 cannons in the level, and not a single one of them does damage to her. She also doesn't have a health bar, and it seems no matter how high you get your XP and abilities in the game, she takes you back to base stats again to fight her. Again, I don't know if this was the way it was supposed to work or not, because by this point I'd had so many rogue glitches each time, and the bosses aren't really guided or explained, so I couldn't tell what was a bug and what was a feature. I tried jumping off the platform to see if there was anything to attack underneath, or another platform to go to make her damageable. I tried pointing all the cannons at her and shooting. I tried damaging the bars that kind of look like chains. She has bullets that you can kind of dodge, images of Fill Ray that attack you if you don't attack them first, though grappling them makes them disappear instantly, and she has a laser that you cannot dodge even if you grapple away from it. Either way, I couldn't figure out what to do with her at all. Plus, every time you reload from checkpoint or die, you have to sit through the entire pre-fight conversation without being able to skip through any of the text like you can in the levels, so I'm sorry, but I gave up on that. Clearly, you can see that there are some glaring issues in all of that. First of all, glitches bad. Second of all, kind of impressive, but also weird as hell how the glitches seem to appear sometimes, but not others. Or, in the case of the level 1 boss, work perfectly fine twice and then break 3 times in a row in both formats, never to work again. This leads to both a disjointed and confusing experience, since firstly it becomes hard to tell if you're doing something wrong or if it's the game itself that's broken, or a mix of both. And also with all of the reloading and replaying of levels, potentially losing your progress with XP and abilities in the meantime, it's hard to get the reward and the continuity from the game. Those were the biggest and most game-breaking glitches. The rest I'll mention here probably don't count as glitches, I'd call them more flaws, and they're all fairly minor. One of the enemies in the game uses a lunge attack where it jumps at you. On an open map, like you can see, this means that they fall off the edge a hell of a lot of the time. The game respawns them on the map, but whereabout, you might ask? I don't know. Sometimes they respawn from where they jumped, but not all the time. Sometimes they respawn further up the map, amongst a bunch of new enemies, sometimes they spawn behind you, where you've already cleared, and sometimes they spawn directly where you are, ready to damage you instantly. Damage in the game can be dealt in wholes, halves, or quarters of a heart, and healing can be provided in halves or quarters. Unfortunately, the game doesn't allow excess, so if you have a quarter of a heart missing, and pick up health that's worth half a heart, guess what happens?
You get nothing! You lose! Good day, sir!
In the level 2 boss fight, you get to attack him for a bit and then he boots you back to the outer platforms to make you earn another chance to attack him. Except there are gaps between the platforms, and if you're not careful, which I don't know how you can be considering you can't see it, the guy will yeet you directly backwards into the hole. Oh, there's no ground behind you. Too bad, bucko, take some damage. The grapple mechanic is a point of contention. I'll go back to it later since I am actually a fan of it, but in some places the hooks you're encouraged to swing on are simply not detected the way they should be, and you just end up falling. A couple of times I had to jump, grapple twice and land, and getting that second grapple to detect cost me about half my health in some places. There's no indicator where the grapple is going, or if the thing that you're trying to grapple is in range. Since it works on a wide variety of objects, including lantern post, the aforementioned hooks, all forms of enemy, environmental objects, and interactable switches, with multiple of those in a closed space, you don't get to choose what the grapple grabs onto, and sometimes when there's only one thing to grab, the positioning that you have to use to actually attach to it is really difficult to work out. In the first level, there's a grapple to get on top of a tall rock, which really doesn't want to be detected in any spot other than a couple of specific ones. The grapple a majority of the time will take you the direction that you want to go, but sometimes it will also just launch you in a straight line, even if that straight line is away from the destination or off an edge, or sometimes it will launch you backwards for kicks. The manual save in the main menu appears not to work at all. You click it, it doesn't do anything. Not sure if it was ever meant to, perhaps it was a plan that didn't get implemented in the timescale, but either way, it doesn't work. There's a skill tree section of the menu too. I have no idea what this does. Nothing is labelled, it's all just unexplained icons. so maybe another feature that was planned and never implemented. On loading the final level after getting the level 2 boss invincible glitch again, my map also glitched out. There is a map of the levels which is actually pretty helpful, until you can't use it anymore because it refuses to show you the map of the level you're actually on and only shows you the previous level. Again, this was the only time this ever happened. All of the times I used the map before this, it was perfectly fine, and I never got shown level 1 whilst I was playing level 2. Also not sure why it placed my character in the middle of the level 2 map when it glitched. Random glitch out of nowhere, not sure why it happened. Finally, some very small visual glitches. The save stones, which chime when you activate them, that I dubbed the Bing Bong stones and will henceforth be addressed as such, can sort of be grappled, but only to the point that the game tries to attach the grapple to them and only succeeds in leaving a ghost image of your character's sword hovering over the stone. It doesn't pull it to you or you to it like the grapple should, it just leaves a sword image, or multiple sword images if you press it repeatedly. This only happens for the Bing Bong stones and nothing else from what I saw. Additionally, I got jump scared by my camera revealing up close just how bad my character's haircut was when I walked past a broken pillar and it decided to bump the camera. Turns out that there's a few things in the environment that do this if they're tall enough. Again, it didn't happen often, and with the levels being quite wide open, this was a pretty negligible thing throughout. But there were a handful of places you got some camera zoom, including another little glitchy place in the third and final level. In there's a small island with a lost soul on it. Lost souls are there in every level to talk to and get hints about what the boss is at the end of the level, so I went to speak to it and got the camera zoom glitch, which seemed strange considering I'd run past a ton of raised ground before this point and never got a zoom. For whatever reason, this piece of ground the lost soul is on is the only piece of floor in the entire game that is invisible walled, and even at the entry point, meaning that when I went to go back to the island that I'd been on, I couldn't get back and the camera zoomed again. I couldn't jump off to die and respawn, I had to reload from the checkpoint in the menu to get out. My second point, I know I'm only on my second point and we're this far in, but to be fair, the first one was a big one, is about the perspective. It's an interesting choice. It's not abnormal, I would say, since this kind of between above and behind angle isn't too uncommon, but there's something about the choice of angle that makes navigating the levels a little difficult. I think that's why they integrated the map, since in some places you can't actually see where you're supposed to go next, and you end up jumping toward the void sometimes. This issue is the worst going down towards the bottom of the screen, bad but not as bad going sideways, and it's not really a problem going forward, since the angle gives you a pretty decent view ahead of you. Your character is central to the screen, but for some reason it doesn't really feel like they are, and I can't put my finger on why. This also integrates with the depth of the level. There are a lot of platforms and uneven surfaces in the game, and this makes it hard to judge where you need to be to land an attack on an enemy or to land safely on a platform. I'll give them a big kudos, because as I always say, this is something that's greatly overlooked and would have been a killer if it wasn't there. But they've put in a marker underneath the character so you can judge where he'll land. That's really good. But when you're attacking an enemy that's right on the edge of a raised platform, I'm not sure if it was my positioning or the game's perception, that even just jumping and swinging wasn't registered as connecting with the enemy, however when they jumped at me, their attack would land. I think the perspective messed with me a little, but the switch of your character and enemies between those two different planes isn't very cut and dry, so it gets tricky to judge where to put yourself to actually land your strike when you're fighting vertically. Similarly, there was a raised platform I had to jump on going down the map, and with the perspective it just looked flat. There was no way to tell how much higher it was than me, or if I could make the jump. It turned out that I could, just about, but there are just little bits of the way that it's made that make it pretty tricky to navigate the platforming and the combat in places. I will happily declare that a majority of the time it's not an issue, but I won't lie that there were some times and places I wish I had the ability to just move the camera sideways or downwards a bit to give myself some more perspective. Now let's look at the story. The Steam page says that you're fighting to reclaim your throne after being framed for your father's murder. but the framing part was news to me when I read it after finishing playing, because I'm pretty sure the talk I heard was about your mother fighting with your father, and everyone kinda knew it was her that killed him. You start off having fallen into limbo and forgetting everything, but from the chats I think I figured out that I was the Prince of Hell. I was trying to go kick my mother off the throne because she was evil. You have some text options when you talk to people, but not many. Their first line is usually a response to whatever you chose to say, before some common dialogue to follow. Not sure where the framing part was, but maybe I missed a bit about that somewhere amongst my reloading for glitches. Either way, the story doesn't have too much to do with the gameplay, though I'll be honest, I do wish I had more of an explanation for the level 3 boss. No, the level 3 boss is not the same as the final boss. There's only so well someone can take a caterpillar creature that doesn't talk to you, has faces on each segment and also no health bar, without wanting answers as to why and how you're fighting it. Maybe it's a very hungry caterpillar reference to link it to greed. Design and visuals, I like them. The choice of a circus theme for the greed level confused me a bit, but then I guess I can't really say what I would put down as greed. Limbo was grey and purple, but it's notoriously a very bland and featureless place, so I can get down with that. There are bones and little plants and stuff to make the environment a bit more interesting, and as said, it's pretty rugged and broken from start to finish in all 3 levels, but the different heights of ground and shapes and sizes of islands make it a bit more interesting to navigate, plus the holes added environmental hazards to give you something else to think about in a fight. Wrath is the second level, lots of lava and a more red tone. I liked the little detail of one of the islands being shaped a bit like a demon, and again, it's challenging to navigate in places, but not too much. And this time weapons and skulls were part of the background to add to the tone of fighting. The map art is good, a little cartoony, but as simple as it needs. The sword effects are pretty good, as are the visual effects on the abilities. Your character model isn't too bad, but I find his wings look a tad flat, and with them being mostly one colour on a gradient, they feel a little dissonant to the rest of him. The enemy models are good, there aren't that many enemies in total for variety. You have about 4 basic enemies and the 4 bosses, but they're all unique and fit well into their environments. Animation-wise, there are maybe 1 or 2 flaws. The second level's boss's slam animation at the start doesn't look as weighty as it could do, and as I mentioned at the start, your character's glide animation is a little jerky. Like, the wings themselves don't actually move, but the body does, and it can look a bit weird. Otherwise though, the environments, models, colours and effects all look good for what they're trying to create and work well together. There is music for the levels that doesn't really change for the boss fights, so in some places the bosses don't have as much impact as they could, or there's no real build-up for them. I felt it more in the 3rd level boss, and the final boss really, since the final boss has a wing sound effect but no background music. Mechanics and gameplay, the core of the game. Other than the bugs and glitches already mentioned, the gameplay is pretty spot on. You get nice feedback from the combat through the sound effects and visuals. The platforming mechanics are mostly the basics, with collapsing platforms and just normal jumping, plus the hook grappling and a few launch pads. There's a cool thing they bring in the last level, where there's a green pathway that only generates as you approach it, which I think I struggled to figure out at first until I realised an enemy was hovering over the void for seemingly no reason. The main part is the combat and the abilities that you're given. You can swap between specials with the bumpers. You have 2 to start and then get 5 in total. Your first is a spin attack. It does low damage but rapidly to the surroundings and is pretty good for the first boss. The second is a trap marker that explodes on proximity to an enemy. It's good to leave on the floor with multiple enemies, since you can jump and attack whilst other things try to get to you and blow themselves up in the process. Very entertaining to watch an enemy nuke a bunch of others with it. The third ability is a jab ability over distance that seemed pretty useless and hard to aim initially, but it does fairly good damage. The fourth is a ground slam plus a fire rune that releases fire in a radius in a pulse for a few seconds after. And the fifth, originally I thought gave you health back, but I have no idea what it does, I'll be honest. The cooldowns are different for each of them depending on how good they are. The jab ability is only a couple of seconds, whereas the fire slam is a fair amount longer. One thing I don't like too much is that whilst your ability cooldown is reloading, you can't swap to another one. Say you wanted to use the jab and then the circle attack, you can't preemptively select the circle and just wait for the other cooldown to finish before you use it. You have to wait for the cooldown to end before you can switch. The grappling. Initially, I didn't really appreciate it, and I tried to avoid it since I didn't think it was relevant any time other than when I had to use it. But despite its unreliability with actually attaching to things, once you get a bit more comfortable with it, it makes the combat a lot more dynamic. Don't get me wrong, it's dynamic already, but from grappling around the islands to dragging enemies to you to attack them before they get ready to attack you, or even dodging enemy attacks by grappling onto enemies and other things, it gives you more control over the area you're fighting on and more maneuverability. There are some enemies that spawn on edges, and particularly in Wrath there are a lot of cracks and crevices for enemies to drop down into, but with the drag ability you can just pull them back up to you and you're sorted. In Wrath, you also get these flying eyeballs that spit acid at you for the first time. They're not easy to deal with because they hover a set distance above you, meaning if you jump, they rise in height too, or if they interact with higher ground, for example, they'll start flying higher. This means that they're often too high up for you to melee them, unless you spend a bit of time on level ground dodging them until they get low enough for you to jump up and hit. This is fine when it's a 1v1 or even a 1v2, but with large groups of enemies it's really hard to do this without conceding a ton of damage from stuff on the ground waiting to bite your ankles. However, I figured out that you can grapple them, and they just drop out of the sky for you to wail on. It doesn't make the combat overly easy, but it certainly levels the playing field and it gives you so much more versatility in fighting with the abilities added in. The game provides quite a lot of things for you to grapple onto as well to facilitate that. There's a combat mechanic that I struggled to actually activate. Behind your health bar there's a sword icon, and the more hits that you land in a row, the more you build up fire around that icon. It's like a charge meter where you incrementally increase your damage the higher up the sword the fire goes. You get a damage increase at your first XP milestone, but this one is designed to make you more powerful the more you can chain attacks in combat. Unfortunately, it's tricky to build up, because unless you stand in the middle of a bunch of enemies and get hit, you usually do a fair amount of dodging, which obviously means disengaging from combat and losing your streak. The bar goes down incrementally too, it's not in chunks or it doesn't fully deplete when you stop, but it's hard to get enough of a chain going to actually fully activate the bar. I did it once as a test, since I figured out that you can actually build up this hit meter on the Bing Bong stones, so I attacked one for a little while to get it to max just to see the damage difference in battle. It was a fair boost, which makes sense as to why it's quite tricky to activate, but whilst it was a nice idea, it ended up being kind of useless because it was so tricky to get enough attacks in a row to build it up. So now that I've done all that rambling, what do I think? Well, it's a nice premise and has some good combat mechanics and design, mixed in with a bit of vague and confusing story and a fistful of glitches that unfortunately add even more confusion to the mix and disrupt the flow of the game. The level design is good, the enemy variety is few but effective, the combat mechanics are good, and whilst the grapple isn't always trustworthy for transversing the levels, it adds another dynamic layer to the movement and combat that makes it a bit more interesting. The boss fights are good, they each have their own gimmicks, which for me took a try or two to figure out, unless you count the final boss, which I couldn't figure out for the life of me, and also I'm not watching that cutscene a million times in the time it takes me to work it out. There's no hand-holding, but also very few hints, it's just, here's a jar and here's a woman. Can't hit the woman, maybe take a look at the jar. It's a shame about the bugs because it meant I couldn't get a clear start to finish to see how much XP and abilities I could unlock and get a consistent look at the story, and I wish I could say what happened with some of them, but the fact a lot of things worked fine in a handful of instances but somehow not in others baffled me. It felt comfortable to play for the most part, not too hard to pick up, though the grapple takes a little bit to get to grips with, and things like the switches I also didn't figure out that you were meant to grapple until the boss fight. The boss fights are challenging, but not too challenging, unless they break, and the levels are the same. It's overall a pretty fun experience when it lasts. I'm going to give this game a 6.5 out of 10. It feels a tad harsh because it's a good basis and the combat was good, but the amount of reloading and disruption caused by unpredictable bugs jarred the experience more than it should have done, with some little difficulties here and there, and abilities I should have had in levels not being available to play with due to having to load levels directly instead of just playing continuously. Good that the option was available so that people can at least see all of the content, but a shame that it was needed. Good work and good promise, just a tad shaky.